Welcome back, friends, and if this is your first time, welcome. This is Michigan Crime Time, and I am your host, Jess. Today, we are in Judge Simpson's courtroom. It is a pre-trial examination in the murder case of Alyson Doulos. The accused is Charles Gamez, and it does go into some detail about injuries that Alyson received during her murder. I am not an attorney. I am not making legal conclusions, nor am I giving any legal advice. All comments are my opinion, irregardless of any verbiage I may use. All persons are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And my video is not the official record of the court. With that being said, if you would like to further support my channel, as many of my videos do get demonetized because of the content, don't forget to like and subscribe and share my videos and comment. And if you would like to further support my channel, there is always the option of memberships, and the link is down in the description. And my merch shop is open, which that link is also in the description. With that being said, let's get over to the courtroom.
All rise. The 14th District Court for County of Washington, State of Michigan, now back in session. Honorable Judge Dennis Simpson presiding. You may be seated.
Court recalls the case of people versus Charles Gamez.
Jessica Blanche appearing on behalf of people.
Christina Costantino appearing with and on behalf of Mr. Gamez, who's present and seated to my right.
All right, very good. You may call your next witness.
Detective Yeager to the stand.
All right, sir, please come forward to be sworn.
Raise your right hand. State first and last name is spelled for the record.
Brian Yeager, Brianyeager.
May I inquire?
And where do you work?
Work for the Washington County Sheriff's Office
And how long have you been employed there?
for over 16 years.
And are you one of the detectives involved in the investigation of the death of Alyson Doulos?
Yes,
As part of your role in this investigation, do you examine and analyze cell phone data involved in this case?
yes,
And have you been trained in mobile forensic investigations?
yes,
Have you been trained in analyzing location data for phone records?
yes,
Were you able to establish the victim, the defendant's cell phone numbers in this case?
yes,
How? And when I refer to victim, I mean Alyson Doulos. Did you find a number for her? And then Charles Gamez, did you find a number for him?
yes.
Okay. And how did you establish those numbers?
Initially, I received those phone numbers from Alyson's brother. And then I later confirmed those were the numbers to both devices when I physically analyzed them.
You had both, you eventually had both devices in your,
Yeah.
okay, in your custody. And were you able to analyze the location data based on the phone numbers you received?
Yes,
Okay. And on March 11th, 2023, what did you find when you observed their location data, meaning Alyson Doulos and Charles Gamez?
And Judge, I apologize. At this time, I'm going to object to lack of foundation. I'm not sure where this observing of their location is coming from, or how he determined this.
All right, to foundation as to the location data. Maybe we can have some questions.
Okay. You had training in analyzing location data for phone records.
yes,
Okay. And you had both of the phones in custody for Alyson Doulos and Charles Gamez.
yes.
And you analyzed their location data based on phone numbers that you were provided.
Partly. Yes.
Okay. How did you do that?
So I found that both phone numbers were serviced by AT&T. So I submitted a search warrant to AT&T for the phone records for both accounts. Then I received those records, which included location data provided by AT&T.
So you reviewed that location data.
Yes.
Okay. And based on that review, what did you find when you observed their location data from March 11th, 2023?
And Judge, same objection. It sounds like he received information from AT&T. We don't know anything at this point about, one, the validity of that information, what that information was, and how he further analyzed it.
The phone data records are in custody. They've been provided to defense. He's testifying based on the phone records, him analyzing them as the location data, that's permitted at a preliminary exam. There's case law establishing that he can testify to cell phone data location.
Objections overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, on 3/11/2023, what did you find when you observed their location data for Alyson Doulos and Charles Gamis?
I found that both of the devices, both cell phones, were in the same area that morning, near Trinity Health IHA Urgent Care, off of Pure River Drive near Eastern Michigan University's campus.
Okay, did you pull surveillance video, or was surveillance video pulled from around that area?
Yes.
Okay, did you review that surveillance video?
Yes.
Were you able to confirm if that was true or accurate?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you observe Alyson Doulos?
Yes.
Okay, so you saw that there was location at an urgent care earlier that morning, and then where'd they go?
The devices separate. Alyson's cell phone stays at the urgent care, while Charles's cell phone heads south in Plain Township in the area of Huron River Drive and Whitaker. Just after 2 p.m., his device then returns to the area of IHA where Alyson still was. And then the devices were together, and then they traveled together southbound through Ypsilanti and to the area together. And they arrived there about 3 p.m. on March 11th.
Address that area. Okay, so what time did they arrive there, you said?
Approximately 3 p.m.
Okay, did the devices stay at that location?
For some time. Alyson's device never left after that until investigators took custody of it. And on the 11th at about 7:06 p.m., Charles's device left.
Okay, and where did his device go?
It headed eastbound and eventually ended up in the Novi area.
Okay, and then where did it go from there? Did you question any witnesses in the Novi area?
No, but I know that.
You know who was located in the Novi area?
Charles' mother.
Okay, so and then from the Novi area, where did he go?
So on the night of the 11th, the device stayed in Novi, in that area, and then on the 12th, it headed northbound to Lexington, Michigan.
And did you question any witnesses in Lexington, Michigan?
Yes.
Who?
It was Charles' uncle.
Okay, and then
Can't recall his name off the top of my head.
okay, and then where did it go from Lexington? And you said that was on the 12th. Where did it go on the 12th from Lexington?
So on the 13th, so it stayed in that area overnight on the 12th. On the 13th, it traveled to the area of St. Clair County Animal Control briefly, and then returned to Lexington. And then on the 12th, it eventually headed towards the area of, on the 13th. 13th is the date I'm talking about, the animal control. So it stayed overnight on the 12th, Lexington, 13th, animal control. And then later that afternoon, it headed towards the area of Dearborn.
Okay, do you have any knowledge of where the defendant was eventually arrested?
Yes,
Where?
Dearborn.
Okay, and when Charles Gamis was arrested, do you have contact with him?
Yes,
Is he in the courtroom?
yes.
Can you point to him and identify an article of clothing he's wearing?
Yes, it's this gentleman wearing the orange jumpsuit next to the defense attorney.
Your Honor, please let the record reflect the witness made in court identification of the defendant.
That objection, the record shows. So
Did you locate, you had said you'd gotten his phone into custody at some point and verified the number. Did you locate his phone on him when he was brought into custody?
The investigating officer took possession of it when he was arrested.
Okay. Can I have 1 second, Your Honor?
yes.
I have no more questions, Your Honor.
All right. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge.
Good morning.
You were asked on direct several questions along the lines of where did he go or where did she go? But isn't it true that based upon your analysis, you can only speak to where the devices allegedly went to, correct?
Partially true.
So,
The surveillance video that shows where Alyson is, that's consistent with her phone records. So I think we can say she's at a certain location.
I understood that part, but aside from the surveillance video, the other locations that you testify that my client allegedly went to, you don't know whether he went to those locations. You only know that a device belonging to him allegedly went to those locations, correct? How do you know that he went to those locations?
Based on interviews.
Interviews of who?
His uncle confirmed that he went to his residence in Lexington, and they went to animal shelter.
But you don't have any interviews placing him at the apartment on March 13th at the time that device was present there, correct?
No, I don't.
What's the accuracy of these records that you testified to?
It depends. These records, especially based on the confirmation we have through surveillance video, they're fairly accurate. Accurate enough to estimate roads that are traveled. You may not necessarily be able to pinpoint a specific house if it's a highly residential area, but you could narrow it down to within a few houses.
Was there an accuracy radius given with these records?
Yeah, those are included with the records.
You don't happen to recall what that is at this point in time, do you?
Each point is typically has a different radius, and there's thousands of them. So no, I don't know.
Have you ever been qualified as an expert in any courtroom for any sort of cell phone testimony?
No.
Did you interview any neighbors in this?
No.
Okay. Did you interview the brother of the complainant?
Yes.
And during the course of your investigation, did you learn that the complainant suffered from PTSD?
Sorry, who's the complainant?
The complainant, Alyson Doulos?
Victim?
The complainant, yes.
I'm going to object as to relevance, Judge.
What is the relevant?
I think for starters, it's a preliminary examination. I think it could lead to discoverable evidence. Second of all, I think it's relevant as to potential conduct that may have occurred within the apartment on the date of the incident.
I don't know if he necessarily, I mean, maybe a medical doctor would be able to talk about her PTSD, and I still don't know how that's relevant with what's been set forth in testimony. Yeah, right now, Judge.
Well, to the extent that it's relevant, I don't know that this witness could testify to that.
And Judge, I'm just asking what he learned in the course of his investigation. I'm not asking for diagnosis
Go ahead. You can
or
answer
whatnot.
this if you know.
I don't recall if that information was provided to me or not.
Okay. You interviewed Mr. Gomez, correct?
I spoke with him briefly, yes.
Okay. You arrested him, brought him into a police station, placed him into an interrogation room, handcuffed him, and then questioned him, correct?
No, I didn't arrest him.
Okay, so you processed him at the interview room or placed him in an interview room and handcuffed him, correct?
Handcuffed when he was brought to me, so I did not handcuff him.
Okay, you met with him in an interview in an interrogation room, correct?
An interview room, yes.
Okay, and he was handcuffed at that time, correct?
Initially, yes.
When you sat down and spoke with him, he was handcuffed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he was clearly under arrest, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You asked him if he knew why he was here when you first entered the room, correct?
I don't remember if that's the first thing I asked him or not.
Okay, but you asked him some questions before reading him his Miranda rights, correct? You did read him his Miranda rights, correct?
Yes.
And he rather politely actually asked for an attorney, correct? Okay. And then after he asked for an attorney, you had a little bit more conversation with him, correct?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Do you recall leaving the interrogation room, re-entering the interrogation room, and asking Mr. Gomez if he had any injuries from the complainant?
Yes.
Okay, so you asked him, and that was after you read him Miranda and he asked for an attorney, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you then, you with Detective Morrison then took some photos of him, correct?
She took all the photos.
Were you present when she took the photos? Okay, and again, that was after he asked for an attorney, after you read him Miranda rights, correct? And again, he was clearly in custody when you asked those questions. Okay. You photographed some injuries of him on his body, correct?
I did not do the photographs.
Okay, well, you were present. I apologize. You were present when Detective Morrison photographed some injuries to his body, correct?
Yes.
And one of those injuries were some bruises on his biceps.
I can't recall that area.
They're right here, if you want to.
Oh,
We already
yeah.
stipulated a few.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could do that. Or
They're all the ones, so. I sent them through more.
did you? I don't think that, right?
No, yeah. They just haven't been published before yet.
If I provided you with the photographs that Detective Morrison took that day, would it refresh your recollection as to what injuries you did or did not witness that day?
Good, yes.
May I approach?
You may. Are those marked?
Yes, Judge, they are. 21 through 25.
All right, thank you.
Or People's 21. Okay, so does that refresh your recollection as to whether you saw some bruises on Mr. Gomez's biceps on the date that you took him into custody, on the date that you interviewed him?
Yes.
Okay, and those bruises were on his, he also had bruises on his hip, above his hip too, correct?
Yes.
And he had some red abrasion to the back of his head, correct?
I can't clearly say that in the photograph.
Okay, but there was a photograph taken of the back of his head,
Yes.
presumably because there was an injury there, correct?
I would presume because it's an injury.
Okay. There was also an injury to his forehead, correct? An abrasion.
I can't see one of those photographs.
Do you recall seeing one at that time?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall asking Mr. Gomez to take his hat off and saying that you noticed a red mark on his forehead?
I don't recall saying that.
Okay. Can I approach the witness and retrieve the
Ma'am.
documents? Thank you. Oh.
Should we move to public?
I would stipulate to publish these, Judge, if that's okay.
Thank you. Is there any way you're walking all the way back? Okay, all right, thank you.
In the course of your investigation, you went to the apartment complex management department and reviewed some footage of the apartment complex, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you physically reviewed that footage at the apartment management building, right? Okay, you did not preserve that footage, correct? You did preserve that footage?
I would have to refer to my report.
If I provide you with your report, would it refresh your recollection?
It would.
And yes, you may approach the
Thank
witness.
you, Josh. You could just take a look at the report and look up at me once your recollection's been refreshed or you've completed reading the document. Does that refresh your recollection as to whether you preserved the footage from the apartment management company?
Does.
Okay, did you preserve your footage?
No.
Okay, so you reviewed, and specifically this footage was of one of the entrances of the apartment complex, correct?
It was the leasing office. I believe there's 3 entrances to that complex. It wasn't capturing the entrances from the roadway to the complex.
So if your report states that the footage was facing southbound towards the entrance.
Towards the entrance. It didn't capture the actual entrance though.
Okay.
That way.
It did capture vehicles coming in and out or moving. I guess I should say, it did capture vehicles moving though, correct?
Yes.
It also captured individuals who might be walking, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you reviewed the footage, and this was the footage of the date and time that it's believed that the complainant died, correct? You reviewed the footage of March 13th, 2023, in the evening hours, correct?
I don't think that's accurate.
Okay, so which date of footage did you view the footage for?
March 11th.
At what time?
I reviewed it for the afternoon and evening of that day.
Okay, did you review the footage of any other days?
I don't believe so.
Okay, is it fair to say that Mr. Gomez wasn't on that footage?
I don't think with certainty I can say identify anybody that was on the footage.
Okay, and you didn't submit that footage to evidence.com or do anything to make sure that footage was preserved and maintained, correct?
No.
Did you further investigate anyone who was on that footage?
No.
Did you further investigate any vehicles that may have been on that footage? Did you obtain a copy of the lease from the apartment complex?
I don't know. I don't recall if I did that or not.
Okay. Did you speak with the apartment management department about anything other than the footage?
I don't believe so.
So my understanding, you also requested footage of the law enforcement center in an effort to see another viewpoint of the entrance to the apartment complex, correct? That's incorrect? Did you request footage of the law enforcement center? Why did you request that footage?
Based on my analysis of the cell phone records, it appeared that Charles's device traveled on Huron Street, which is directly in front of the law enforcement center. There is a motion activated camera that captures part of the roadway there. So it was an attempt to see if I can identify any vehicles involved.
Were you able to identify any vehicles of interest in that video? And is it fair to say that you weren't able to identify Mr. Gomez in that video, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you requested that footage from 3 to 7:30 p.m. on March 11th, 2023, correct?
Yes.
You didn't review that footage of any footage of that location for any other times, correct?
No.
And you could have asked for footage from additional times during that day, correct?
Yes.
But you did not. In the course of your investigation, you didn't investigate any other suspects, correct? I could have just a moment, Judge.
Yes, go ahead.
Nothing further, Judge. Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Sorry.
Call your next witness. Please come forward to be sworn.
I swear to affirm the testimony I'm about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please state your first and last name and spell it for the record, please.
Heather Morrison, HEATHERMORRI,
Great, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. And where do you work?
Washington County Sheriff's Office,
And how long have you been employed there?
16 years.
Okay, are you one of the detectives involved in the investigation of the death of Alyson Doulos? Okay. And when Charles Gamis was taken into custody on this case, how did that come about?
The U.S. Marshals, Detective Williams, took him into custody.
Could you know what date that was on?
It was on Thursday.
3/17/2023?
Yep.
Okay. And did you have contact with him when he was taken into custody?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Is he in the courtrum?
Yes, he is.
Can you identify?
Your Honor, we'd stipulate to identification for the purposes of exam.
So stipulate, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. And did you, when you took him into custody, were you the one that took photographs of the defendant before you took him into jail?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why do you guys normally take photographs of defendants prior to putting them in or releasing them to Washtenaw County Jail?
Yes, if they agree to it.
Okay. And did he sign a consent form to take the photographs?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And what happened while you were taking photographs?
He indicated that he didn't have any injuries, but that he did have a scratch from Ms. Doulos
And where did he say that was at?
on his forehead.
Did you photograph his forehead? Did you see anything there?
I did not.
Okay. And did he indicate anywhere else on his body that he had any injuries?
He pointed out a cut on his right hand, on his first finger, on his right hand.
Did you see a cut on his finger?
Yeah, it was beginning to scale over.
Okay. And did you take a photograph of that? Okay. And did he point anywhere else on his body that he was injured?
No, I went through and observed the rest of the things that I photographed.
Okay. So he pointed two places and then you observed other marks that you actually took photographs of.
That's correct.
Okay. And where were those at?
So he had some irritation on the back of his head, but Mr. Gomez indicated that was from him recently shaving his head.
Okay.
There was some bruising on his right arm. There was some bruising on the inside of his left bicep area. And there was a small circular bruise just above his hip bone on the left side.
Okay. Do they look to be fresh injuries?
They look to be about 5 days old.
Okay.
All right.
All right. No more questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge.
Good morning. You testified that you interviewed Mr. Gomez. Are you aware that he surrendered himself after police called him on his cell phone?
Yes.
Okay. And so he was called, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I got this clear in the record. He was called on his cell phone by another officer and asked to surrender himself, and he complied, correct?
5 days after.
Yes, okay. When you met with Mr. Gomez, he was handcuffed in an interrogation room, correct?
I don't recall if he had handcuffs on still or not.
Okay.
He was in an interrogation.
He was under arrest, right?
Yes, he was drinking a Gatorade.
Okay, but he was under arrest. He wasn't permitted to leave that room when you met with him, correct?
No,
Okay. Do you recall having some conversation with him prior to him being read his Miranda rights by Detective Yeager?
I'm sure they spoke. I don't know what about.
You were present during the entire time that he and Detective Yeager spoke, correct?
Once he was read his Miranda rights, yes. But if they had casual conversation before that, I don't know.
Okay. You were in the interrogation room. It was you, Detective Yeager, and Mr. Gomez, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall Detective Yeager asking him, something to the effect of, do you know why you're here? Okay. Do you recall Detective Yeager reading him his Miranda rights?
I did.
Do you recall him politely requesting a lawyer?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And then after he requested a lawyer, you all had some additional conversations, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You and Detective Yeager left the interrogation room for some period of time and then came back to the interrogation room, correct?
Correct.
That period of time was what, maybe a couple of minutes?
I would have to look at the video.
Okay. It wasn't, a whole day though, right? Okay. Same day.
Then
Okay. When you and Detective Yeager came back in, you asked Mr. Gomez if he had any injuries from the complainant, correct?
yes.
Okay. And you asked him that after he was read his Miranda rights and indicated he wanted an attorney, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You also asked him that before presenting him with a consent form, correct?
I don't recall what order it came in, but I asked him if he wanted to preserve his injuries, and he said he did.
Do you recall making a comment about him having some sort of mark on his forehead?
I don't recall.
Okay. When you presented him with a consent form, you did not read that form to him, correct? Okay. You did not ask him if he knew how to read, correct?
No.
Okay. You didn't ask if he understood the form, correct?
No.
You actually didn't explain what the form was. You just said, sign this form, right? No, you believe you explained the form? How do you believe you explain the form?
Normally, we explain it to the defendant that a department issued form and that it is consent. If he wanted me to take photographs of his body, which I wouldn't have done had he not consented.
Do you recall saying something along those lines to Mr. Gomez that day?
I believe I do, and I actually believe that I actually indicated whether or not he'd be more comfortable with me taking the photographs or Detective Viejo being a male.
Did you learn at some point that when Mr. Gomez signed that consent form, he was intoxicated?
That was after our interview and everything was completed. We had a conversation about the fact that he had something to drink. Yes.
Okay. But at the time that you first interviewed him, you didn't ask if he was under the influence of anything, correct?
Did not appear to be.
Okay. And but you didn't ask either, right?
No, I didn't.
And at the time he signed the consent form, likewise, you didn't ask if he was under the influence of drugs or alcohol or anything, correct?
I didn't.
Did you ask him, once you learned of that, did you ask him how much or what he had to drink?
I believe he told me.
Do you recall what that was?
I think he had a couple drinks and a gummy, marijuana gummy.
Okay. You swore to the initial search warrant to enter the apartment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that was for a welfare check, or I'm sorry, that was following a welfare check, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So at the time of the welfare check, when officers put the key in the door, entered the apartment, there was no search warrant. Okay. And that was for a welfare check, or I'm sorry, that was following a welfare check, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So at the time of the welfare check, when officers put the key in the door, entered the apartment, there was no search warrant,
That's
correct? Are you aware there was an earlier welfare check that was completed that day?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So there was an earlier welfare check completed several hours before the second welfare check, correct?
I don't know the exact time.
It was completed that day though, right?
That's correct.
And it was completed, I mean, would you say it was more than an hour before, right?
Again, I can't testify to the time.
Okay. If I told you there was a report that said the first welfare check was completed at 15:59 hours, would that surprise you?
Object, she's already answered that. She says she doesn't remember. If she wants to refresh her recollection, it was in her report, that's fine, but.
I'll move on, Judge.
Thank you.
Okay, you did not indicate in your search warrant that there was a previous welfare check that was completed, correct?
I would have to look at the one.
If I showed you a copy of the search warrant, would it refresh your recollection? Oh, okay. Oh, everybody brings their own documents there. I like it.
So I did not indicate that there was an initial welfare check. I believe I was more concerned about the dead woman that was laying on the floor.
There was no search warrant that was obtained between the first and second welfare check, correct?
That's correct.
In the search warrant you authored, you indicated it was based on some of the information that you gained from Sergeant Krantensburg. Is that correct?
Krantensburg, yeah.
Krantensburg, yeah. But at the time you requested that search warrant, you hadn't been to the scene yourself, correct?
No, I haven't.
Did you go to the scene at any point in time?
To drop off the search warrant.
Okay. Did you physically enter the apartment at any point in time?
Detective Sings would not allow me to.
He's a tough one. I get it. Okay. So when your probable cause listed in your warrant, that was based upon information that you gained from others who were presumably at the scene. Is that correct? And you had not spoken to any family members of the complainant yourself, correct?
That's correct. At that time, yes.
At that time. And at the time you obtained the search warrant, you also had not spoken to any neighbors or anything yourself, correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware of anything any of the circumstances surrounding when the officers obtained the key from the apartment management company?
I mean, you want me to tell you what they told me was going on?
No. I'm wondering what you have personal knowledge to. Were you involved in any of getting the key from the management company and transferring it over to the officers?
No.
Okay. And you didn't have any contact with the apartment management company, correct?
No, I didn't.
And you did not investigate any other suspects in this case, correct? So no, correct. If I could have one moment, Judge.
You may.
Nothing further, Judge. Thank you.
I have no more questions for this witness.
All right, you may step down. Thank you.
There's really one final witness, the medical examiner.
Please come forward and be sworn.
Take your seat, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear affirm the testimony you're about to give. Steve, state your first and last name and spell with the record.
Randy Toshjian, Randy, last name is Pashjian.
All right, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. And what is your current occupation?
I'm a forensic pathologist and medical examiner with the Washington County Medical Examiner's Office.
And how long have you been there?
About 18 months at this location.
How long have you been a practicing physician?
Since graduating med school, I'd say 14 years.
Okay. And have you had any special education or training?
I did a residency in anatomic and clinical pathology, a fellowship in forensic pathology, and a fellowship in neuropathology.
And how long have you been a pathologist? Have you been it for 14 years or?
So I completed my pathology residency in 2013, so about 10 years.
And what is pathology?
Pathology is a major branch of medicine that is primarily concerned with disease processes and how they affect the body.
As part of your position, do you perform autopsies?
Yes.
And what is an autopsy?
An autopsy is a specialized medical and surgical procedure that is primarily responsible for examining the external and internal contents of a body.
Okay. And what is the purpose of an autopsy?
An autopsy's purpose is to document several things, including stigmata of natural disease, any sort of identifying marks, tattoos, and in cases where injuries are observed, to document injuries and their extent of these injuries.
Okay. And during your years as a practicing physician and during your present course of employment, have you had an opportunity to conduct autopsies?
Yes.
Okay. Approximately how many autopsies have you conducted?
I'd probably say around 1,800 to 2,000.
Have you previously been qualified based on your education experience as a witness in forensic pathology and court proceedings?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to qualify this witness as an expert in forensic pathology under MRE 702.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection for exam purposes.
All right, so qualified.
Did you have an occasion to perform or assist in the performance of the autopsy on an Alyson Doulos?
Yes.
Okay. And where was this autopsy performed?
The Washington County Medical Examiner's Office, which is located at University Hospital, U of M campus.
Okay. And at approximately what day was this autopsy performed?
I believe it was March 15th.
Okay, and there are different parts of an autopsy. Can you explain the different parts to the court?
Sure. So an autopsy is generally started off with external examination, following photographs that are taken of the body. The body is, of course, given a unique case number throughout the entire course. External examination is performed by myself, identifying marks, injuries on external surfaces. Samples for toxicology are collected at the time. Once that's completed, more photographs are taken after the body is undressed. A more thorough examination is performed. And once all that is done, then we would open up the body and examine the internal structures as well. Again, taking photographs, collecting samples for toxicology, and documenting any sort of injuries or natural disease.
Okay, do you also take x-rays?
In certain cases, yes.
Okay, did you take x-rays in this case?
Yes.
Okay, and did the x-rays show anything in this case?
The only thing that I recall was a radio opaque or bright object in the oral cavity.
Okay. And what were your external observations regarding Ms. Doulos?
So she was in a very early state of decomposition, and there were scattered bruises and scrapes kind of on the face and on the neck, and I believe on the extremities as well.
Okay. Was there any external injuries to her face? What ones on her face? You said her face specifically. Where were her injuries located on her face?
I believe there was one on the chin. There may have been one or two on the forehead. Maybe one on the cheek, if I recall.
Okay. And were you, did you note any internal observations?
Well, actually, there was actually one other more significant injury, which was a sharp force injury. It looked like sort of linear, kind of almost like an incised or incision across the mouth and the lips. Okay.
And when you say you took x-rays and it showed some type of reflective object, did you find anything? Obviously you did you find anything when you did the external, what that could be, or was that when you did the internal?
Yeah, actually that was when we did the external.
Okay, so what did you find that was
a piece of metal. One end was sharp and one end was kind of like a fragmented end.
Okay, and then did you move on to internal observations?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you observe when you did your findings?
So there were a number of different findings, the most significant of which I recall was a fracture of the right superior horn of the thyroid cartilage, which is in the neck. It's part of the larynx.
Okay, and can you tell which injuries were the most fatal in this case?
Well, that would be part of the fatal process, that fracture.
The fracture of the neck?
There were other findings as well, which I mean, I can't recall everything off the top of my head without having the report in front of me.
But there were other injuries, but that was the major one, was the fracture in the neck.
Yes.
And besides the significant external observation you saw with the metal object you pulled out. Okay. Did she have any natural diseases which contributed to her death?
Nothing else.
Okay, was the toxicology performed in this case on Ms. Doulos?
Yes.
Okay, did you find anything in her system that would have contributed to her death?
No.
Okay. And as a result of your experience training in this autopsy, did you form an opinion as to cause and manner of death of Alyson Doulos?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the manner of death?
The manner was a homicide.
Homicide, and what was the cause of death?
I believe I called it strangulation with sharp and blunt force injury.
Okay. May I approach a witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 26. What is that?
Looks like a copy of the report that I produced following the autopsy.
Is that a true and accurate copy of your report you authored for this autopsy of Alyson Doulos?
Yes.
Your Honor, people move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 26 as Exhibit 26.
No objection for exam purposes only.
May I
Exhibit
publish?
26 is admitted.
May I publish to the court?
Yes.
May I approach.
Yes.
I have no more questions.
All right. Thank you. Cross-examination.
Morning. When this autopsy was completed, there were other people present, correct?
Completed or during?
During, I'm sorry, during.
During, yes.
Do you recall who all was present?
I believe Detective Sinks was there. My autopsy assistant, our photographer, and maybe an MEI or a medical examiner, investigator would come in and out of the room during the course for unrelated purposes.
Did you speak with Detective Sinks about what allegedly occurred in this case prior to performing the autopsy?
I believe so.
Do you recall how many occasions you spoke to Detective Sinks about this?
I think the only time was at the autopsy itself.
Okay. And did you speak to him prior to writing your post-examination report about what had allegedly occurred?
Just during the autopsy.
You mentioned there was a photographer present while you were performing the autopsy. But it's my understanding that Detective Sinks also took some photos while the autopsy was being performed. Is that correct?
I believe so.
In your autopsy, it lists a date of death as March 14th, 2023 at 11:25 p.m. How did you determine that?
I was not the one to determine that.
Who would determine that?
Actually, I'm not sure who would determine that. It would be whoever was there at the scene who would make that pronouncement. So it would either be first responders, our own MEI, or somebody else.
Okay, so if that date's come in your postmortem examination report, would you have inputted that date of death into your report?
I did not. It was actually part of the system database as it was already input.
Okay. Okay, so you couldn't have changed that date and time even if you wanted to?
No.
Okay, and you don't know who provided that information of time, date and time of death?
Sure, find out.
Okay. Can you provide an estimate of how long the body was deceased for at the time that it was found?
Well, based on the degree of decomposition, which was very early or minimal, I'd say somewhere around 24 hours, certainly no more than 48 hours.
Okay. Are you aware if the medical examiner investigator who arrived at the scene wrote any sort of report?
Yes.
Did you use that report in determining your findings in the postmortem examination report?
No, the findings are what I see. So that report was available before the autopsy was conducted, which kind of just guides me as far as like what type of a case this is, but the findings themselves are what I observed at the autopsy.
You would read that report prior to performing the autopsy, though. Did you read the report prior to performing the autopsy?
I believe so. If it was available. If it was a busy night, if it wasn't available, it would have been a report or whatever, but more often than not, they're usually available by the time of.
Did you rely on any other reports in either performing the autopsy or authoring your postmortem report?
We usually get these reports as well as part of standard procedure. I'm sure that was available for this one, but I can't recall.
Okay. You indicated in your report that cause of death was strangulation with blunt and sharp force injuries. Isn't it true that there wasn't extensive bruising to the neck, though?
There were some.
Some.
And extensive is kind of, a vague term. So, I mean, there was bruising.
And do you recall where the bruising was located?
I believe there was at least either a bruise or a scrape under the chin, and a couple of other marks kind of on the side of the neck.
Okay. You testified on direct about a displaced fracture of the right superior horn of the thyroid cartilage. That is a mouthful. Is it possible that injury was obtained that was a previous injury that wasn't obtained in this incident?
I don't believe so. It was acute because of the amount of blood acute appearance of the blood.
Okay. Is it possible that injury was caused by, say, for example, a fall that day?
I've never seen an injury like that in a fall. Typically, I see them when there's massive trauma to the head as part of the complex of injuries that result, whatever caused that massive trauma. On its own, never seen a case like that, and I don't think describe this as being a common occurrence.
Can you opine about what type of strangulation you believe this autopsy revealed?
Well, it would be either manual or ligature. There was nothing pointing in one way or the other that was definitive.
Can you describe what manual strangulation is?
Manual just refers to strangulation with one's hand,
Okay. What about ligature strangulation?
using an object like a shoelace or a cord.
Okay. Were there any markings on the neck that would indicate there was some sort of object utilized?
The only thing was there was a small linear scrape on, I believe, on the left side of the neck, which made me ponder the use of an object.
Could this injury have been self-inflicted?
No.
And was the just with regards to the strangulation, is that the type of injury that would have caused immediate death or a quick death?
It would be fairly quick, yes.
Okay. Do you have any approximate time period for what fairly quick would mean?
I'd say minutes at most.
Do you recall while performing the autopsy whether there were bleeds in the whites of the eyes?
Yes. I believe I described it. Yeah.
Okay. Did you take photos of the eyelids or the eyes? Okay. And sounds strange, but what's the typical procedure for taking photos of the eyelids? Would you direct someone to take those photos?
If I see something that's important to document, I would.
Okay. It's my understanding you found there was blunt force trauma to the head. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The complainant likely wouldn't have died alone just from that trauma to the head, though, right?
Unlikely.
Okay. And that injury alone probably wouldn't have incapacitated the complainant to the point where she couldn't have walked around, correct?
So could you repeat that?
That injury, the blunt force trauma to the head, that would not have incapacitated the complainant to the point where she couldn't have walked around or gotten up.
I'm not really sure. I mean, there was more than one finding in the head, so I'm not sure if there's one particular injury that you're referring to or just a overall kind of picture of findings in the head.
Okay, just overall. But is it possible that head injury was caused post-mortem?
No.
Is it possible that injury was caused in the days prior to the complainant's death?
No, it looks acute.
And how do you determine that?
Just the appearance of the blood bleeding into the soft tissues.
It's my understanding you determined there wasn't swelling to the brain. Is that correct?
No, actually, there's a moderate to severe swelling of the brain.
Okay. What does that indicate?
In the most basic term, swelling of the brain is one of the first reactions to any sort of injury to the brain tissue. So it could occur in instances of oxygen deprivation or blunt trauma or any other sort of insult to brain, the tissue of the brain.
Okay. You also found sharp force trauma that was to the face, correct? Okay. That injury alone would not have caused immediate death, though, correct? When you performed the autopsy, was there blood found in the complainant's mouth?
Don't recall.
Okay. Do you recall if any fluid was found in the complainant's mouth? Would reviewing your report refresh your recollection, or do you believe that's something that may not have made it into the report?
I could look. I don't know if it would have made it. If it wasn't there, I wouldn't have included it.
Okay, if it was there, you would have put it in the report, though.
More than likely.
Okay. Do you recall seeing any cuts inside the complainant's mouth?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall how many or the location?
It was just mostly in the midline superior, like kind of like what's called the frenulum on the between the lip and the gingiva or the gums, kind of right in the midline.
That particular wound to the face, are you able to determine what kind of the trajectory of the wound would be?
No, I'm not sure. Trajectory refers to projectile like a bullet, so I'm not sure I understand.
Are you able to determine what part of the wound to the face was inflicted first?
No.
Do you recall if there was any blood found in the complainant's lungs?
I don't recall. It might be there were.
Okay, would you like to look at your report to refresh your recollection? Do you have a copy of the report, or would you like me to approach it one?
Yes, you may.
May I approach? Thank you.
I didn't document any blood.
Okay, so there not being any blood in the lungs, that would be that would mean there's no indication she aspirated any blood, correct?
I mean, that's a.
Yeah. Okay, normally with a facial wound with like this one, you'd expect to find blood in the lungs, right?
I can't say that that's true for every single case. It depends on how much bleeding there is and how much time elapses between when the injury occurs and when death occurs.
Okay. It's my understanding during the autopsy, a knife was brought to the, while you were performing the autopsy. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you viewed the knife, I assume, correct? And is it your opinion that the wound to the face was inflicted by the knife that was brought to the autopsy? Can you determine what, if any, trajectory or manner that knife was used to inflict that wound?
Just based on the fact that the fragment that was collected from the oral cavity fit the chipped portion of the knife on the sharp edge, my conclusion is that the sharp edge was used to inflict that injury.
But you can't determine positioning or anything of that sort, correct? Positioning of where the knife was located in reference to the complainant's face.
I mean, it would have been in front of the victim's face.
That's fair to suggest.
Might have been.
You couldn't determine, for example, if the knife came from a higher or a lower perspective, correct? Okay. You completed some microscopic slides, correct? In your autopsy, you indicated, under each of the microscopic slides, you indicated post-mortem changes. What does that mean to you?
Well, that means that the tissues were starting to decompose and autolyze, which is typical for any sort of case post-mortem, but because she was starting to decompose she was in a very early state of decomposition, it was a little bit more pronounced in the microscopic exam.
Okay, and you wrote post-mortem changes under each of the microscopic slides for each of the major organs. Is that does it have the same meaning for all of those organs, or were there different changes based upon the different organs you did the slides for?
It's the same meaning.
You testified about some marks on the complainant's chin. You're not able to tell how long those marks had been there for, are you?
Not any certainty, but some of them look fresh.
Okay. Would you classify the major mark at the front of the chin, would you classify that as an abrasion or a bruise? Or something else? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which one were you referring to?
The major Sorry, I gave you my copy of the autopsy. The major bruise at the front lower part of the chin.
The red abrasion, the mandibular region, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I believe so.
That would have been a scrape.
A scrape. Okay. You testified on direct that there was a piece of metal found in the oral cavity. Was that something unusual to find?
Yes.
Okay. Any idea where that may have came from?
It looked like it fit the knife that was brought in. There was a chip in that knife that fit perfectly.
Did you remove that fragment? Did you photograph that fragment after removal? Did you see if that fragment matched the piece missing from the knife?
Yes.
Okay. There were no other pieces of metal found in the complainant's neck or anything, correct? Did you obtain any of the complainant's prior medical records in the course of performing the autopsy or prior to?
You mind if
Of course.
I just try to get as much information as possible for our case. I'll be able to. I don't believe we did.
Okay. Were there any signs of the complainant having previous injuries to her neck? Based upon your review, if there were any efforts to resuscitate the complainant at the scene, would that show up in an autopsy?
Sometimes, whether or not they use medical devices, or whether they try to perform CPR, we might see rib fractures.
If someone tried to perform CPR, it may not show up while performing an autopsy, though, right?
If you're talking about chest compressions.
Chest compressions.
Yeah, there are times where there's no evidence of someone trying to do chest compressions on a victim.
I could have a moment, Bill.
Yes.
One last question. In the course of your performing the autopsy, did you determine whether the complainant had any prior facial injuries?
I mean, whatever I observed on the face, I documented whether there were scars or older bruises or scrapes, whatever would have been present would have been documented.
Okay. No major breaks or previous fracture signs that you noticed, though, correct? Okay. Nothing further, Judge.
All right. Anything else?
Briefly, Judge.
Yes.
Decomp can sometimes be temperature determinate, correct? Depending on.
Oftentimes.
I'm sorry. Say that.
Oftentimes.
Okay, so you can't give an exact time for decomposition.
Yeah, we always give windows or ranges
Okay.
because there are a lot of factors involved.
Okay, and defense counsel had mentioned the date of death that's on the report. Someone can't obviously be declared dead until they're found, and someone who actually can determine time of death. That's when you guys assess the date of death, correct?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, that was kind of jumbled.
That's right.
So you can't determine death till obviously someone is found.
Yes.
And someone declares them dead.
Yes.
Okay, and it has to be some type, like a medical professional or someone besides the police, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And there's a difference between expirated. Do you have you know the term expirated? You ever heard that term before?
Expirated.
Expirated. Okay, then never mind. No more questions.
Just one question.
All day.
You testified that, of course, time of death is temperature determinate. Were you provided with a temperature of the body taken at the scene?
Our investigators typically do that, so I would expect there given, but I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay, so you don't recall whether you relied upon the temperature that was taken at the scene or not in creating your postmortem report? Okay. Nothing further.
Doctor, you may step down. Thank you, sir.
There's no more witnesses if people rest.
Any witnesses for the defense?
No witnesses for the defense, Your Honor.
Judge, I ask you, bind this matter to circuit court. I believe it's a question of fact for the trier of fact. I'll reserve any further argument for a vote.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. Listed in the felony complaint, there are 2 counts. One count is open murder. The second count is unlawful driving away of a motor vehicle. I'm going to address count 2 first, even though it's the less serious account. With regards to count 2, there has been no indication that my client took possession of a vehicle without the owner's permission. There's been no testimony today about who owns that vehicle. There's been not even to a probable cause standard has there been a showing that vehicle was owned by a particular individual. There was testimony concerning pings, but those are pings of a device, not particularly of my client. There's no indication the vehicle was taken without the owner's permission, without authority, or that my client, even if he did take the vehicle, that he didn't have permission to do so. Frankly, Judge, there's been no proofs as to that count, I'd suggest at all throughout this exam. With regards to count 1,
hold on a second, counsel. You're saying, I guess I'm trying to understand your argument in that case and why that wouldn't become an issue of fact for the fact finder as to permission, because the owner of the vehicle, and there was testimony regarding that, the owner of the vehicle is deceased. There's then ping data, which places the defendant at the location where that vehicle is. So why wouldn't that be a question of fact?
Your Honor, I don't believe there was sufficient testimony to suggest that the vehicle was owned by the complainant. I don't think that, for example, there has been no registration documentation, insurance documentation. There's been nothing to suggest that that vehicle was solely and only owned by the complainant. So it's not just permission, it's also ownership that has not been proven, which is the second element of unlawful driving away of a motor vehicle.
Okay, go ahead.
Your Honor, with regards to count number 1, we would ask the court to dismiss that matter. This is a case where there's no eyewitnesses, and the case rests solely on my client's cell phone device pinging at the home. However, as the court's abundantly aware, mere presence does not mean that my client has committed a crime. It can be determined the date and time of the complainant's death or whether my client was the cause of it. All the evidence we have heard today is that my client's phone pinged at the home at around the particular time that she was last heard from. I think given that there's no connection between the crime and my client, we would ask the court to dismiss this matter.
Response.
Judge, I mean, the officer testified that it was her vehicle. They put it in lean to do a lookout. He was in possession of the vehicle. They actually searched the vehicle afterwards, located both keys in the vehicle. There was no forced entry in the home, so it wasn't just pings on a phone, and that's how they determined that the defendant was the one who committed this horrendous act. For probable cause standard, I believe we proved our case by that. Obviously, there is plenty more evidence that we could put on to show the defendant did this horrific act. But for probable cause standard, I believe we proved our burden. We asked you to find it over to circuit court. Thank you.
With reference to count 2, I believe that the unlawful driving away of a motor vehicle, I have an individual who is deceased. The vehicle is not there, which is part of what the police were looking at. The testimony I heard indicated that it was indeed the decedent's vehicle. So I don't think ownership is really necessarily at issue. And I think it's a question of fact as to whether or not he would have lawfully taken or driven that vehicle, and him, according to the ping data, end up in the same spot. With reference to count 1, it is clear to this court, given all of the testimony in this case, particularly also relating back to the ping data, the vehicle, that the apartment keys are in the vehicle, testimony that because of the type of lock on the apartment, that it was locked, which means there was a key, that somebody locked that apartment with. Given everything and taking everything into account in this case, the court does believe that it presents a question of fact regarding the homicide in this case and whether or not the defendant committed that. But the people, for the purposes of preliminary examination, have sustained their burden. The court would bind the defendant over to stand charges on both counts. Counsel, you acknowledge receipt of the information waiver treating.
Yes, Judge, we do.
How does your client plead?
He wishes to stand mute.
Defendant having waived from a reading, standing mute. Court will enter a not guilty plea as to both counts. Pretrial in this matter will be set for
November 14th at 1:30 p.m. with Judge Conkey.
November 14th, 2023, 1:30 before Judge Conkey.
My first assigned information, Joe.
Yes, and you may want to.
The complaint was amended to 311. I don't.
Yes, so that it would need to be put on there also. Thank you. Bond will continue as denied. Thank you.
Okay, well, that was the conclusion for part 1 of this hearing. Part 2, the link is in the description for this video, so click on that to watch the second half of this hearing. Chimagwich, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.